If you have money sitting in a bank or under your mattress and you don't do something about it, it's vanishing right before your eyes. And the number one enemy to this stagnant cash is inflation. In this video, we're going to discuss what inflation is, what causes it, how it eats away not only your cash, but your retirement savings, who actually controls it, and most importantly, what you can do about it. If you're new to this channel, I'm Dr. Jeff Anzalone, Louisiana periodontist that teaches doctors and other high-income professionals the tools that I'm using each month to build passive income for freedom. If you're new to the passive income game, download the free guide using the link below this video. Now, for years, inflation has hovered around about the 2% mark, but lately it's actually now over 6%. This is from rising unemployment rates, higher cost of goods, failing businesses, and large injections of stimulus money from the Fed. Whether this increase of inflation has long-term effects on the U.S. is yet to be seen. But for those of us that are focusing on investing in real assets, it's time to understand a few things, such as how inflation works, the best inflation hedge to invest in, and how rising inflation can impact your assets and your debts. First question we must ask ourselves is, what exactly is inflation? Inflation is when prices actually increase over time and the purchasing power of a currency drops. It means that you can actually buy less goods and services with your money than you used to be able to in the past. So for instance, I can still recall the day that I wanted to play my favorite video game, Galaga. Okay, I loved Galaga growing up as a kid. While we were traveling on a snow skiing trip in an airport, they always had this Galaga game there, okay? So one year I went and I played. The next year I couldn't wait to play it again. So I couldn't believe that when I went to play it, the cost had actually doubled from a quarter to 50 cents. Inflation. So with inflation, your dollar's the purchasing power again, it diminishes over time. So for example, if you were to look in the mid 90s, what you could buy with $1,000 back then would now cost around $1,700 to buy today. That's actually a 65% cumulative rate of inflation over 24 years. So let's use a little bit different example, a little bit larger example. So if you bought a house, same thing in the mid 90s for $250,000, today to buy that same house, you would need $420,000. Remember, this also doesn't take into consideration any of the home's appreciation along the way. It's only accounting for the spending power and value of the dollar change due to this inflationary period. At some point, all economies are going to experience inflation, increases, and also deflation. This isn't so bad until when actually income levels of a population, they don't track or exceed inflation. In that case, what happens, people become a lot more poor, even if they think they're making more money, they're really not. Next question, what actually causes inflation in the first place? Well, many of us, we relate inflation to the concept of supply and demand. Typically, a rising demand for goods can cause the supply to go down, thus higher prices. Remember the toilet paper shortage we had in the pandemic? Same thing. And we actually saw this in Louisiana during the first half of 2021 regarding housing costs. I mean, it was completely out of control as it seemed that all these people around here were getting the stimulus money and they just turned around and they wanted to go out and buy a house. So again, this is another example of supply and demand, as the number of people wanting to buy a house was much larger than the number of homes that was actually on the market. And this caused home prices to get to a point that I personally have never seen here in my hometown in Northeast Louisiana. This is another example of what economists refer to as demand pull inflation. This happens when actually demand for something outpaces the supply. There's also something called cost push inflation. Now, what happens is this occurs actually when prices of goods go up due to a higher rate in the cost of wages and raw materials to actually produce them. So this high cost of production can decrease the amount of total production in the economy. because demand for goods, this demand for the goods, they haven't changed. The increased prices from production are then what? They're just passed on to consumers. My dad recently told me that the company, he has a hardware store, and the company that he purchases hot water tanks from, they let him know, hey, we're actually going to be raising the amount that we charge you, the hardware store owner, hot water tanks by 30% next month. So this is just an example of cost push inflation, and not that many more people need hot water heaters, right? Hot water tanks. So that means there hasn't really been an increase in demand, but the cost to manufacture it really has gone up. And unfortunately, what is he going to have to do? He's just going to have to pass this along to the consumers. Now, Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki states that another way inflation can happen is when the government manipulates a money supply, such as when the U.S. does something called QE, or quantitative easing. He claims that injecting more money into the financial system allows the central banks to actually issue more debt, which causes prices to go up. All right, next, let's talk about what inflation can do and how it can erode your retirement savings. Many people approach retirement by attempting to what? Accumulate enough to maintain their current lifestyle and their current income. So if you're the type of person, if you're making $100,000 a year, then your financial advisor probably would more than likely set you up in investments based on keeping you in that $100,000 lifestyle. But what if you're not going to retire for 30 years from now? Now, if that's the case, then you'd actually need investments providing $210,000 a year due to the increased inflation rate, this cumulative rate of inflation rate, which actually happens to be, in this scenario, 109% over the past 30 years. They also don't take into consideration, when you're with the financial advisor, all the fees in these retirement accounts that are charged along the way to manage those accounts, which again, this also, along with inflation, erodes the funds required to keep up with the inflation rate. This continued increase in prices really wouldn't be as bad if the purchasing power of a dollar actually went up alongside of it, except we know that's not the case. Americans must attempt to make more and more money each year just to keep up with inflation. But unfortunately, wages have been very stagnant for decades. Now, speaking of inflation, who actually controls inflation? Well, in the US, the Federal Reserve, like other central banks, they're the ones that control inflation. One of their responsibilities is to keep prices from rising or falling too quickly, basically known as price stability. They know that an average rate of inflation of about 2% each year is about the right amount. And they get this figure based on the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. The federal funds rate is actually the primary tool the Fed uses to conduct monetary policy by the rate banks pay for overnight borrowing in the federal funds market. Changes in this rate influence other interest rates, which in turn influence borrowing costs for households and businesses. Now, whenever inflation gets too high, the Fed typically raise interest rates, thus slowing the economy, thus bringing the inflation down. On the other hand, when inflation gets too low, they typically lower interest rates to what? Actually stimulate the economy. Thus, it actually causes inflation to go up. So once inflation drops, it usually makes a stronger demand for goods and services, which can actually push wages and other costs higher, influencing inflation. In a nutshell, inflation, as you can see, is a never-ending up and down cycle. So speaking of up and down cycles and inflation, and we talk about real estate a lot, what can we talk about when we put the two together, inflation and real estate? Now, as you've heard about this, me talk about this in the past, more millionaires invest in real estate and use it as an inflation tool and to produce cash flow in retirement than any other asset out there. Real estate investments hedge inflation, as their value typically is expected to what? Go up over time, right? So there's three main ways that make real estate a great inflation hedge. The first one is appreciation. And really, the real estate, the appreciation actually helps offset the inflation. So, in the real estate market, the term appreciation refers to the increase in the property values over time. So if you're a home buyer, you've probably seen this before. The prices have gone up, right? So this is due to inflation. It's due to inflation. It's due to increased job growth and overall development in the town that you live in. Many times you're able to raise the appreciation value, sometimes whenever you improve your home. For the investor in assets, such as maybe like an apartment complex, appreciation can actually be forced by updating the property. This allows for the monthly rents to be increased, which can be seen as a larger profit once the unit is eventually sold. The second way, speaking of rental income, is we can raise rental income. Because one of the reasons people become real estate investors in the first place is the fact that their tenants, what? They pay their bills. And this income that you can get from renters will not only cover the monthly expenses that you're going to have, but also it helps to generate cash flow. Now, as the property is improved or held for a certain period of time, annual rent increases can actually generate even more cash flow than the original investment. So, for example, let's say you have a 10 unit rental property that actually generates $10,000 in rent each month, okay? 10 units generating $10,000 of rent each month, which is basically $1,000 a unit. If you have an increase in only $100 a month, we have 10 units, okay? And you're getting 10 grand a month. We're going to increase $100 a month, okay? So what is that going to give you? Each month, that's going to give you an extra $1,000 a month, right? What about a year? It's actually going to give you 12 grand a year. Over a 10-year period, that's going to give you an extra $120,000 per year. Not a bad return. And the third way is actually depreciating debt. Now, just as real estate appreciates in value, the debt that's owed is actually depreciating in value due to inflation. So let's use the primary residence that's got a $750 a month mortgage. All right. So if we use the 10-year period between 2009 and 2019, um, if you're paying $750 a month, then within 10 years, and again, we're going to use this 10-year period, the mortgage debt is going to be worth less due to inflation. So for our example, that $750 a month in mortgage is now, after 10 years, is only going to be worth about $640 due to inflation. Now, when you use leverage or financing, you're able to take advantage of depreciating debt. So even though your monthly payment, the $750, it's going to stay the same each month, each year, right? The value of that payment is doing what? It's getting less over time because of inflation. So, is there a way that we can profit with inflation? So, if you want to learn how to really profit with inflation, really look no further than the wealthy, because their main goals I'm talking about these ultra wealthy people, they focus mainly on leverage and hedging. They understand that you can go out and you can get a fixed rate loan. You can take that, you can buy a cash flowing asset that makes the debt payment, and you can use basically little to none of your own money. So by doing this, it also increases the return on investment. So think about this scenario in an inflationary environment. Because the debt payment is fixed, it becomes less of a cost as the purchasing power of a dollar goes down. So in return, your investment and income, they continue to grow due to investing in assets that actually what? Hedge against inflation. So as we discussed earlier, if you invest in real estate, again, the debt payment stays the same while rents continue to go up due to inflation. This creates more cash flow for you, even though your debt payment stays the same. Same thing happens regarding businesses. As the cost of goods rise for the consumer, businesses can turn around and do what? Just like my dad did, adjust his prices. Thus, him and other business owners can benefit from inflation. Why does this work? Well, it works because business owners, practice owners, investors, they're not selling their time. Business owners and investors are in control because what? They're selling products and then they're investing in assets that actually hedge against inflation. On the other hand, if you're an employee, you're not a business owner, but if you're an employee, you're not in control of the product, right? And their product is what? Time. They're not in control of their time, nor are they in control of their money, the bank or a mutual fund or whatever it is. So now that you understand that there are multiple reasons why real estate can provide a reliable hedge against inflation, one of the main reasons that I personally invest in commercial real estate, such as in passive syndications, is due to the cash flow, which actually serves well in an economy such as ours with inflation. Now, if you want to learn more about how you can get started in real estate, check out this next video. Take care.